One of the most important and meaningful activities that we as human beings engage in is sharing food. It has all kinds of implications when we share food. Do you ever notice people have a tendency to want to feed some wild animal or a dog or whatever, and if the animal takes the food, they feel connected and safe and so on? That's the way it is with us. We want to eat together, we reconnect, we reconcile, we build community. So often, people will, and when they talk about memories of their childhood or of their growing up, they'll talk about the wonderful gatherings for the Thanksgiving meal, or the Christmas meal, or a birthday, or a wedding. All these include the whole idea of people eating together. And in that process of eating together, identifying themselves more closely in communion with one another, in knowledge of one another, and in reconciliation with one another. I remember about a number of years ago, I told the story of Zacchaeus in about the 5th grade. And you remember Zacchaeus climbed a tree because he was so small he couldn't see Jesus, and he was a tax collector, and he was dishonest. So Jesus walks by and says, "Zacchaeus, come down." So Zacchaeus came down the tree, and Zacchaeus said, "Lord and Master, come to my house tonight for a banquet, eating together." And in the course of that banquet, the taxpayer was sorry for what he had done. He was going to return all the money he had stolen from the people, and he was going to be just and honest in the future, in the context of eating that meal together. Well, a week later, I was in that same classroom, and I wondered if the children remembered that story. And one little fellow put up his hand, and he was going really well until Zacchaeus was climbing down the tree. He probably didn't know what a banquet was, but he said Zacchaeus climbed down the tree and he took Jesus out for lunch. He had the right idea. It's in that context of eating together that we solve problems, hopefully, that we are able to bond together and come to some sort of an agreement. Now, in the Scriptures, there are two great banquets that we must be aware of. One is the Feast of the Passover. Now, I think you remember the background of that. The people of God were in slavery in Egypt, and they were trying to convince the Pharaoh to let them go back to the promised land. And so God inflicted upon the Egyptian people all kinds of plagues, grasshoppers and boils and so on. Finally, the last plague was going to be the angel of death. And the angel of death was going to go into each household, and the oldest firstborn in that household would die. So he instructed the Israelites, prepare a meal, sacrifice a lamb, share the food, get ready for a journey, but take the blood from the lamb that you sacrifice and put it on the lintel of your house. And when the angel of death comes by and sees that, he will pass over. And that was a covenant. It was a meal covenant that God established with his people. And what did that covenant say? I will be your God if you will be my people. I will watch over you. I will protect you. And that was all done in the context of the Passover meal. Now, that covenant of God was changed significantly in a different banquet, the Lord's Supper. It was at the Lord's Supper when Jesus said, "This is my This is my blood given for you. This is the chalice of salvation, eternal salvation, the new covenant. So in that banquet, because of the sacrifice of Christ, in a sense, we are freed, and in that freedom we become the sons and daughters of God and have an opportunity to be with God forever in heaven. It was a banquet. Now, how important this sharing of this Eucharist is for all of us. What would our community be like if we didn't have the Mass? What would our community be like if we didn't have the Eucharist? I've heard any number of times people who have left the faith and gone somewhere else, coming back, and you ask the reason why, because they missed the Eucharist. So here we are, the family of God's people, sharing a food together. We share Christ, we are bonded with Christ, and we are bonded with one another. And we support one another, and we are family because we share the meal of the Eucharist. Now there's one more banquet that has not been celebrated. In the gospel story, the people recognize the fact that this was a miracle that Christ was able to, with a small lunch, feed 5,000. There's another miracle waiting to happen. The other day, I went to the computer and I typed in 2 words: world hunger. Immediately, all kinds of information and details came out. Over 800 million people are hungry in our world today. 800 million. Many of them are dying, especially the children. There's enough food in the world to feed everybody, 2 or 3 times over. But some people in our family of God's people are going hungry every single day. Wouldn't it be a miracle if we could all get together and share the food that we have so that nobody goes hungry? The information I had listed about 7 or 8 organizations that are dealing with world hunger. And the one that I recognized right away was Bread for the World, because I've been contributing to that for a number of years, but there are others. So my suggestion for all of us and for you, go to the computer, type into words world hunger. Get an idea of how the family of God's people are hungry. And look at the various organizations that are addressing it. And do something, donate something, or join something that will make a difference. If every Christian in the world were to do that, we would have another miracle. And the miracle would be that the 800 million people in our world today that are hungry will not be hungry.